The next speaker, guys, and welcome Mike. Mike is a great developer. He works in the core team of Ionic, right?
Yeah.
So he's a coder, more than a presenter, but he does also great presentation usually. So clap your hands to Mike and enjoy the next presentation.
So while I get set up, I'm going to ask a question. Does anyone have a lightning cable that I can borrow?
I think there's one under there.
There is. Perfect. See, you guys have everything nice.
Trying to make it easy.
I really don't need it for anything. I just need a phone charge. Don't lie to me, computer. Wonderful. Awesome. Okay, so my name is Mike Hartington. I work for Ionic. I work, basically, my day-to-day is making sure all the things that we have are properly documented, people know how to actually use it, providing meaningful demos, etc., etc. If you do want to follow me for some reason, you're going to get a lot of pictures of beer and cats. The internet loves cats. And by show of hands, who considers themselves a web developer and not a native developer? Okay, so I'm going to feel like the odd man out because I'm not talking about anything to do with native development, so to speak. I'm not going to be talking about how to make your Gradle build a little bit faster, how to make provisioning profiles much easier. But what I do want to get into is Ionic. For those who don't know, Ionic is a complete and total SDK, framework, whatever word that you want to use to describe it, for building mobile apps, native mobile apps that you can install through the App Store, built with web technology. So HTML, CSS, JavaScript, all the fun stuff that we as web developers kind of like. It's built with Angular underneath for the coding structure, so that way we have actual separation of concerns. We have our proper controllers, model view, controller setup, all the good stuff, and Sass for style sheets. So if you've done any web development in the past year or two, this should be stuff that you can, that you should, at least be familiar with, or at least understand and have a grasp of and know what it is. And the main goal of Ionic is to empower web developers. There are so many cool tools out there that are focused on native development, so your iOS devs, your Android devs, and it kind of is pretty easy to be a native developer. I know iOS makes it a little bit more difficult, but imagine trying to do web development with the amount of browsers, the fact that IE is still around there, it's a nightmare. So web developers want to participate in another event, and that is actually shipping apps. Apps that aren't just, responsive websites, but can actually take advantage of things like camera APIs, better geolocation, SQLite storage, Bluetooth APIs, all the good things that native development has. Just kind of some stats. It's quite a popular project on GitHub. It's gotten just over 24,000 stars. Not that that's any sign of success. It is a good ego boost. But what it does show is that there is some kind of activity around the repo. These just don't happen overnight. And we have meetup groups all over the world. We have an Ionic UK group, which is so far our most popular meetup group. We have an Ionic Italy. We have an Ionic Italy.
Really?
Yeah. So low key. We have an Ionic Paris, Ionic Canada, Ionic San Francisco for people who want to go to San Francisco for some reason. The point is that we have meetup groups all over. So the user group and user base is getting very large. And we also have apps that are topping the charts in both Google Play and iOS App Store. Who's ever heard of an app called Sworkit? Anyone ever heard? It's called Sworkit. No, I'm surprised. You have in the back?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's have over 12 million downloads between iOS and Android. It's been featured on both the iOS App Store and Google Play. They're doing something right, but it shows that the whole idea that, oh, web technology inside of native apps, it's never going to work. We have 12 million downloads that say that it does work. And besides the small startups that are obviously going to be interested in it, we also have large enterprise, like banking institutions, insurance agencies that are actually taking interest in this because, if you're part of an internal development team, how many internal apps you have to manage, and if they're going to be written in native technologies, that's a separate internal dev team for both iOS and Android. It just makes sense to use something that can be reused multiple places. So this whole web thing, talking to Giorgio earlier, it's running on 10 years. The fact that you could do cross-platform development with web technologies and using a native wrapper. First, iOS SDK came out in 2008, maybe? And after that, not so long after that, that's when the concept of this thing called Cordova, or PhoneGap, you've heard it before. So when people say we're still badgering on about this, we've tried this before and it was okay. I had an Android 2.3 device and iOS 3 or iOS 4. It was all right. It wasn't great. Why would we do this? We have these new tools where we can take JavaScript and then transpile it to native. Accelerator, your React Native, your native script, all these different tools which are kind of just rehashing the same idea. An embedded runtime, and you can just code against that with JavaScript. Or some people just fall back to native. Some teams, they want to do iOS development for some reason and like writing Objective-C or Java. I hate both. I hate JavaScript too, but no language is great. But the web has improved a lot since those early days, especially since Android 2.3. Oh yeah. iOS has always been fairly good, but it's safe to say that with iOS 9, 8, 7, it's gotten to a next level where it's much faster, it's much optimized, much more optimized for single core performance. So WebView, JavaScript, browser, none of that is actually an issue anymore. What really is the issue is having a entire development kit to take advantage of all those features. And that's what Ionic is, and specifically Ionic 2. So earlier I mentioned all the fun stuff about Ionic, and that was referencing Ionic 1. Who's kept up to date with Angular at all? A few people. So Angular came out with this drastic change of Angular 2, which looks completely different from Angular 1. It's not really that different. But Ionic 2 is built off of Angular 2. And when I say that they're pushing what's possible with web, I really mean that. Think of things that aren't shipping in the browser today, but we can actually use with Ionic 2 and Angular 2. So it's going to seem weird to jump into 2.0 when we're not even talking about 1.0, but we just want to talk about some of the new things that we're working on with 2.0. So we want to make sure that your app is even simpler to code. You're not jumping through hoops to figure out what's going on. We want to make sure that our navigation is actually on par with what native can actually offer, and in some cases even better. And we want to make sense of all the tooling. So JavaScript, it's gotten a lot better, but the tooling and whole ecosystem has not. So we wanted to provide something that at least makes some sense of it. Oh yeah, and that whole NG2 thing. We wanted to make Angular 2 so much easier to learn. I think it's safe to say before I started working on Ionic 2, I knew zero Angular 2. And now I can safely say that I think I know a little bit. So it's, even building the framework has helped me learn. So, simplicity. What do I mean by simplicity, and how does it actually relate to what I'm building? So, since this, oh yeah, perfect. So, if you've ever used any CSS framework or any kind of style sheets, you've probably seen code kind of like this, where everything is, let's take an element and throw a bunch of classes on it to describe how we want it to look and render out onto the DOM. So we have examples from our own Ionic 1 documentation, so to prove that we're not pointing fingers at anyone else. Twitter Bootstrap, and actually Foundation. So every CSS framework kind of treats it the same way. You have an element, you throw a bunch of CSS classes on it, and call it a day, and then move on to the next one. Oh boy. Oh boy. I have no idea what this is doing. This is copy-paste from documentation, and this isn't Ionic 1 code, this is Bootstrap, but this kind of goes to address the point. No one knows what this code's doing unless you've really dove in and know Bootstrap like back in hand. It's kind of complicated. And that's really the point, is that making your components in your markup, making them actually look like meaningful things, it's apparently pretty hard, and no one's really gotten it a little bit easier. And we think we've kind of gotten it a lot easier with your new stuff. So we just use raw elements, custom elements based in CSS only. So when you want to describe a layout, it actually makes some semantic sense. So now we have a list. Who can tell me what a list looks like? Doesn't matter. It's still a list. We know what this is going to do. We know how this is going to, in a sense, relate back to the native platforms. We have a list header. Okay, well now I'm thinking like the Contacts app inside of your iPhone or Android phone, and Ion item. Okay, I'm just assuming going inside a list, I have a bunch of different cells in that list. So I may not know what the exact rendered output looks like, but at least I can make sense of the markup and figure out what this is actually doing. And for those who actually like CSS, it's super easy to target these and actually style them yourselves. So, in fact, this is all standard CSS, nothing fancy. You can just target the element and override the styles as you see fit. So, navigation. This is probably the biggest pain point that a lot of people had with Ionic 1, and I totally agree, and it was one of the hardest things to solve. But let's consider the following questions. Or, not questions, situations. I want to have a modal inside of my app, and then inside that app, inside that modal, I want to be able to navigate around to different views or view controllers or whatever Android has that's equivalent of view controller. Or I have kind of the side menu, side draw that most apps kind of have nowadays. I want to be able to navigate to sub views within that own menu. How would I do that? So it kind of comes back to a place where we kind of fell short. You know, we got to own up to the mistakes, and that's, since it was web technology, we figured, well, let's just use a URL-based navigation system. So we have, if you've ever heard of it, UI router. We essentially have a state machine where you can configure components, so to speak, or states. You just give them a URL, you give them a template and a controller, and it will figure out how to navigate inside of your app based on this. Now, UI router is great, and it works wonderful in a traditional desktop application, but it doesn't give you flexibility. So if you want to do anything that's outside of those URLs, you can't. If you wanted to deep link to a view that's 4 views deep in the stack, and then pre-populate all those views, so that way when the user goes back, they have what they expect for the back navigation. Or maybe you just want to load an app from nothing and create your own app history. UI Router didn't offer that, and mostly because the browser doesn't offer that. It's just a case where we figured, let's just go off the beaten path and forget about the browser implementation. So we took a pretty big cue from native and created this concept of push-pop navigation stack. So everything is, once you want to load a view, it's on the stack. You want to go to a new view, you just push a new view onto the stack, and it animates forward, and you have the nice animation. You want to push a view, but you also want to pass in city. Well, you can just do that as simple. You can do that simply as well, or just passing it along as an object. So in this case, we're importing the page that we want to navigate to, in Angular 2, Ionic 2. All components are classes essentially. So we have this ES6 class. We have our instance of the nav controller, so the current instance of the navigation stack. And then from there, we're just pushing our second page and pushing that onto the stack. It seems, a bit trivial, but this allows us to do so many more things. So now that we have our own navigation, control of the navigation, we have the ability to push and pop views whenever we want. We have the ability to insert views before we go to a state and after we go to a state. We can update and remove views from app history on the fly. And the whole idea of deep linking into an app, that's totally possible now, where you can link to a view that's like 4 or 5 pages deep, and then just recreate the app history so that way they can follow the breadcrumbs back up. And if we think about this, it doesn't update the URL, which I think is a very polarizing thing so far. We're going to see how well it works out. But the URLs can still be there if you want them. So that way, if you want to ship an iOS and Android native app, and then also ship a responsive web app, that's also possible. Okay, doing pretty good on time. Last bit is the tooling part of it. Tooling is apparently pretty hard, especially with new JavaScript. And that's because JavaScript's really changed. ES6 is actually a thing, so the JavaScript that most people are very comfortable with, well, we have basically a whole new language to look after. We have this thing called TypeScript. Who's heard of TypeScript? Microsoft actually doing something pretty good. We actually have static types inside of our language, so we actually can say, no, this variable is a string, and this variable is a number. It can't be anything else. We have a lot better tooling and hook-ins with our editor, so that way we can see, so that way we can have a much deeper understanding of what our code actually does. And all of this with the promise to make your development a lot faster, a lot easier, and so much less painful. No more undefined is undefined. Undefined is not defined, or cannot do something with undefined, or number is not a number. A little bit of ES6. We actually have a proper module syntax. We don't have globals everywhere, so that's good. Yay. We have modules, but we don't actually have a module loader. So you take your wins where you can get them. We have actual proper scoping. So for those of you who have languages where things are scoped to a function, JavaScript didn't have this. We couldn't do a for loop, declare a variable inside of that loop, and have it print out all the numbers inside the iterator. Now we actually can do that. Small wins that other languages take for granted, JavaScript didn't have. Promises, so we can say, I know this value is going to be here at some point, just when it gets here, do this thing afterwards. It's kind of like async await, a little bit simpler. not as cool. And we have classes, thing that people actually really want to do object-oriented programming. We can just have a similar syntax built on top of what JavaScript already offers, and we can have a nice development experience. TypeScript kind of builds on top of ES6 and offers things like decorators, so that way we can actually supply some metadata to our code. We have actual static typing, so that way when we when we have a function that expects 2 numbers and we give it a number and a string, we can know before we go in the browser that you messed up here. And those types are 100% optional. You don't need to use them if you want. For most apps, I actually suggest that they don't use typing, but from a framework perspective, it totally makes sense. And its even bigger selling point is that because it understands your code, it can provide you with a much deeper code completion than you would ever get from any other tool. Okay, but what do I actually do? I heard Webpack is a thing. I heard Browserify, Gulp, Grunt. I don't know what any of these things are. But don't worry, we kind of taken care of all of that hard work for you. So Ionic provides its own decent setup, what we think are sane defaults. So that way you can just start a project, get up and running, and have a TypeScript build setup that just works. Windows, OS X, Linux even. It all works. And that's kind of a trademark on it. It just works. It's a good thing. So how hard is it to create an Ionic project? Well, first, for now, we're going to install a beta version of our CLI. I did mention that this is Ionic 2 is all in beta, I think. Well, if I didn't, it is now. So once we have the CLI installed from npm, we have the Ionic command available to us. We can just do Ionic start, give it a project name, and then we're going to pass the optional flag for a v2 project. We'll cd into that directory, obviously, and then run Ionic serve. So, I think so I'm just going to run Ionic start temp because that's ignored by Git, and I'm just going to give it a v2 flag. Nice proper warnings, that way I don't overwrite my existing stuff, but I'm going to overwrite it. And not surprisingly, the Wi-Fi is so much faster than it was at my house when I ran this, so good on you, Twitter. And this whole process of npm install is going to go out, fetch you the proper templates. If you don't supply a starting template, we'll give you a tab-based layout. So you have either tabs, you have a side menu layout, or you just have a single blank view. Kind of what you can get from like Xcode, if you think about it, or Android Studio. And then we're going to go out, and after all that's set up, install all the dependencies. So that way it's just ready, and you can go ahead and run serve. This is going to be the stressful part because npm is running very slowly with the new releases, so I think I'm just going to cut that. And oh, would you look at that, I have a project already built. So I have this project that I've already gone out and built. And this is actually going to be provided in the slides, a whole sample project. I'll run our Ionic serve command. We'll get this nice kind of output from all the compiling that's going on. Go, and in fact, I'll do --lab, which is going to go ahead and emulate iOS, Android, and Windows Phone for the 5 people who have a Windows Phone. Yeah, I said Windows. And you know what? It's not that bad.
Arcade simulated, yes.
Let's see. Yeah. We're going to do sound. So this is a Spotify app. Okay, so here we can see a good overview. This is iOS where we have a nice little checklist, everything that we know and love. Android has their nice ripple effect. Maybe not in the browser. Windows Phone has what they do. iOS. I'm not a Windows Phone person, if you can't tell. So we have all of our content loaded. Nice scrollable list. Yeah, we're gonna go to Intergalactic. This is all using web technology underneath, so nothing about this is native run iOS. So we're going to do the run command. It's going to compile and actually deploy to an iOS simulator. If I wanted to and had 10 minutes, I could do it to the Android emulator. And if I had a Windows machine for some reason, I could run it to a Windows phone.
You said what?
If I had a Windows machine. I don't know, I tend to blank out when I say that. So, while that runs, go back over to the presentation. So, while that is actually building, I'll finish up the slides. Iron 2, really underneath, there's so much going on, and I don't have enough time in 20 minutes to actually go over all the fun stuff that we're doing underneath. So there's a link here to all the documentations. If you go to ionic.io/2, you'll get redirected to all of our docs, which I really encourage you guys to take a look at. Kind of some, nice thoughts. The web is always getting better. We've never seen a situation where the web stepped back. So it's a really good time to bet on the web. As Brendan Knight says, bet on JS. I have the sample app right here. M. Hartington on GitHub, Star Trek, Ionic. It'll go, has all the code that you need. Oh no, it didn't actually build. Oh well. So, if you have any questions, I'd love to take them. If not, that's it.
So this is built on top of native technologies?
Yeah, so underneath there's actually an embedded web view. If you want to actually load, that has a communication layer between a JavaScript bridge and a native bridge. So if you want to talk to Bluetooth, you have a JavaScript API to call Bluetooth through native code.
Yeah.
And then it'll intercept kind of like, it's like a JSON format message pack. Once it gets that JSON, it'll actually go ahead and implement the correct native commands to handle all the communication, and it'll just send those commands back and forth.
So what do you do about native betas?
You mean like iOS 10?
Yeah.
You mean why my build didn't actually work?
Yeah. Or,
Yeah.
New APIs or things
New
like that.
APIs, it's all kind of standardized so that way when the new betas come out, we already know about it, we already have access to it, we can already update the code that we need to, and once it actually gets released, no one actually notices. So.
Are your user interface elements optimized for mobile, or do you also have like desktop? Because I want to write one singular Angular
Right.
application
Can you
and work
repeat the
on
question?
desktop and mobile.
So is it optimized for mobile, or can it also run on desktop, larger screens essentially? So it is optimized for mobile, but it can run on mobile on larger screens. So right now this is full desktop. This is totally overkill for screen size. But we have an interface kind of based off interior design for desktop. So that way we have this nice kind of look and feel. We are going to be focusing a lot after we get our 2.0, 1.0, our kind of final release out there. So that way we can make sure it is a little bit more restrained for desktop and actually feels at home.
I have two questions.
Yes.
First one is about Cordova. Do you use Cordova behind the scenes?
We do use Cordova behind the
Okay.
scenes.
So all the native interaction happens through Cordova, right?
All native app interaction happens through Cordova, yes.
Okay, cool. Second thing, how the community can contribute to the documentation.
To the documentation.
Or to the examples?
Oh, that is such a good question. So, thankfully, if you go to GitHub, DriftyCo, it's